Your life has turned into a line of identical days, and deep down, you know it. There's a kind of pain no medicine can reach, a pain that doesn't scream, that doesn't show up on any test. It appears when the house falls silent, when your phone shuts off, when the last episode ends, and all that's left is the muffled hum of the ceiling fan. That's the moment when something inside you whispers a question nobody wants to answer. You're not tired of your job. You're not tired of traffic, of your house, of your partner, of your kid, or of the bill that just landed in your inbox. You're tired of living a life that deep down was never really yours. Take a deep breath. Over the next few minutes, we're going to dismantle together the biggest lie you've been sold since the day you were born. The lie that this emptiness is some kind of flaw in you, when in reality, it's the last sign that you're still alive on the inside. Have you ever noticed how the worst moment of the day is usually the one when there's finally nothing left to do? Work is done, the messages are answered, the dishes are washed, and then comes that strange silence. A silence that isn't peace. A silence that weighs on you. The blue light of your phone lights up your face while you scroll through an endless feed, not because you actually want to see anything, but because anything is better than facing what shows up when the feed stops. And what shows up when it stops is a feeling almost impossible to describe. It's not ordinary sadness. It's not emotional heaviness. It's not anger, and it's not fear either. It's a kind of distance. As if you were watching your own life from a window, from the outside, unable to step in. That feeling has a name, and it isn't new, but it has never been as widespread as it is now. Millions of people at this exact moment, in different beds, in different cities, at different ages, are feeling exactly the same thing, and almost none of them talk about it. Because out there's a silent rule. If your life looks like it's working, you have no right to feel empty. You have a job, you have friends, you have internet, food in the fridge, a roof over your head. What more do you want? And that's exactly the question that suffocates you because you don't know how to answer it. You only know that you want something no word can quite name. I know this is hard to hear, but I need you to understand one thing before we go any further. This emptiness you feel is not a symptom of weakness. It isn't laziness in disguise. It isn't a lack of gratitude. It's the echo of a very old question pounding inside a very modern body. The question is as old as humanity itself, but the answer your era offers for it is short, colorful, and disposable. And that's why it never satisfies you. There was one man who understood this better than almost anyone in recent history. His name was Viktor Frankl, an Austrian psychiatrist, a survivor of concentration camps during World War II, and the author of a small, devastating book called Man's Search for Meaning. Frankl lost almost his entire immediate family and nearly his own life in that extreme setting. And even so, he came out of it not broken, but more lucid than most free men would ever be. He came back carrying an observation that would change psychology forever. Inside those places, he noticed that the prisoners who survived emotionally were not the physically strongest, nor the most intelligent, nor the youngest. They were the ones who held on to a reason to keep going, a child to see again, a book to finish, an idea to deliver to the world. Those who lost their sense of meaning withered away. Even with food, even with apparent health, they lost vitality like someone who forgets to breathe deeply for too long. After the war, when Frankl went back to seeing patients at his office in Vienna, he expected to find people carrying deep emotional scars from the harshness of that period. Instead, he found something different. He found ordinary people at peace with money, with families, with good health. People who, on the surface, had no reason to suffer. And they would come to him saying exactly the sentence that may have crossed your mind these past few days. I have everything, but nothing makes sense. Frankl gave a name to this invisible condition. He called it the existential vacuum, a hollow at the center of the soul, created by the absence of a real reason to exist. And here begins the part that few people have the courage to say out loud. Frankl wrote about this vacuum back in the 1950s. He described a silent epidemic of people with everything on the outside and nothing on the inside. Now imagine, 70 years later, when consumption has multiplied, when entertainment has become infinite, when every single second of the day can be filled with stimulation. If back in his time this emptiness was already a problem, so today it has become the backdrop of human existence itself. It has stopped being the exception. It has become the rule. It has become the norm. It has become the air you breathe without even noticing. The question that lingers is, why did this happen? Why did millions of people arrive at a point in history where the meaning of life became something so hard to find that it almost feels like an ancient myth? And the answer, according to Frankl, is less complicated than it seems, even though it's deeply uncomfortable to face. Maybe the most disturbing thing is this. This existential vacuum doesn't show up in most lives in a dramatic way. It doesn't arrive with background music or a loud, scandalous crisis. It settles in slowly, around the edges, almost asking for permission. It starts as a quiet disinterest in things that used to excite you, a book you never finish, a hobby that loses its charm without warning, a friend you stop calling, a landscape that used to move you and now passes by untouched. Life slowly loses its texture. The days start to blur together. And by the time you notice, it's been months, maybe years, since the dominant feeling of your mornings has been anything other than a mixture of obligation and reluctance, with no spark of genuine desire. There's a fundamental difference between a human being and any other animal on this planet. A wolf knows what it is, knows what it has to do, knows what drives it. Its instincts are clear. It hunts, it mates, it protects its pack. It doesn't wake up in a crisis at 30 wondering if it picked the right pack. The problem is that, at some point in evolution, the human being lost that inner compass. The instincts that work for other animals became too weak inside us to dictate our choices. No instinct tells you to get married, to pick a career, to move to a new city, to have a child, or to become a vegetarian. You choose. And that choice doesn't come pre-assembled. For thousands of years, this wasn't a serious problem, because something else filled the place of instinct. Tradition. You were born into a family that followed a religion, in a town with its own trade, in a culture that clearly defined what a man or a woman was supposed to do. You didn't have to invent your own life. Life already came with a mold. You could agree or disagree, but the mold was there. There were rituals for being born, rituals for growing up, rituals for getting married, rituals for dying. There was a place for you, even if it was a small place, even if it was a place you wanted to break away from. You knew what you were rebelling against when you rebelled, and that, as oppressive as it might have seemed, offered one precious thing: direction. Frankl realized that the 20th century human being found himself in an unprecedented situation. He had lost the instincts that tell him what he must do, and he had also lost the traditions that told him what he should do. What was left was a human being who doesn't know what he wants, doesn't know what's expected of him, and doesn't know where to go. He called this the double loss. Imagine a boat in the middle of the ocean with no sail, no oar, no compass, no map. That's more or less how the modern human spirit feels when it stops for a second and actually listens. What's left is total freedom. And nobody warns you that total freedom, with no direction at all, is one of the cruelest forms of prison that exist. You might recognize this paralysis. You might have spent hours in front of a streaming menu unable to pick a movie. You might have opened a food delivery app while hungry and closed it without ordering anything. You might have spent months thinking about changing jobs, cities, relationships, routines, and frozen every single time at the moment of action. This isn't laziness. This isn't pathological indecision. This is the purest symptom of the condition Frankl described. Too many options, no inner reference point. Too much freedom, no North Star. And when the mind gets tired of that impossible game, it does the only thing it has learned to do. It picks up the phone, it taps, it scrolls. It distracts itself from the abyss for a few more hours. If we stopped right here, the diagnosis would already be brutal. But there's another thinker coming from a completely different time and country who saw the same wound from an even more unsettling angle. His name was Søren Kierkegaard, a 19th century Danish philosopher considered by many to be the father of existentialism. A man who died at 42 after spending his entire life writing about one single thing: what it truly means to be human. And the answer he offers is so uncomfortable that most people would rather pretend they never read it. Hold on to this, because what he's about to say is what disturbs people the most who listen all the way through, and I'll come back to this point later to show how he ties everything together. Kierkegaard begins with a sentence that, if you let it in, could change the course of your entire week. In a work called The Sickness Unto Death, he says that most people live in despair without even knowing they are in despair. Read that again. Most people live in despair without even knowing they are in despair. He's not talking about the kind of despair that screams. He's talking about a silent, mute despair, hidden beneath a packed schedule, beneath the Sunday smile at the family lunch, beneath the pretty picture on social media. The despair of someone who has forgotten himself so completely that he no longer even notices he's forgetting. For Kierkegaard, this despair is born out of a refusal that most of the time is unconscious. The refusal to be who you really are. The human being, he said, is the only animal that can choose not to become who he was born to be. A sunflower doesn't decide to turn into a cactus. A lion doesn't decide to turn into a rabbit. But a human being can spend 80 years squeezing himself into a form that isn't his, and call that adult life, maturity, responsibility. And the price he pays for that is the silent despair that shows up every time he's alone for a minute. Kierkegaard described this condition with an almost clinical coldness. He said there are basically 3 versions of this despair. The first is that of the person who doesn't even know they have a self to be realized. They live in a purely external way, reacting to stimuli, playing roles, and the idea of having an inner life doesn't even enter their consciousness. The second is the person who knows they have a self, but doesn't want to accept the self they actually have. So they spend their life trying to be someone else, gluing onto themselves traits, opinions, and desires they saw in someone they admired. The third, and the deepest, is the person who sees who they are and even so refuses to be that, preferring to cling to a version of themselves that fits better with what others expect. All 3 of these, according to him, are forms of escape, and they all leave the same internal mark: a restlessness that will not quiet down. Have you ever felt like that? Have you ever felt like you were playing a role in a play you didn't write, on a stage you didn't set up, for an audience you didn't choose? Have you smiled in a meeting knowing none of it matters to you? Have you said yes to an invitation that hollowed you out inside just so you wouldn't seem weird for saying no? Kierkegaard would call that despair, Not the despair that cries, but the despair that performs. The despair of being a person that, deep down, even you wouldn't recognize if you passed them on the street. He took it further. He proposed that human existence moves through stages. Not stages in the sense of mandatory phases, but in the sense of levels of depth at which someone may be living. The first stage, the shallowest, he called the aesthetic. Not aesthetic in the sense of beauty, but in the original Greek sense of the word, which means sensation. The aesthetic life is the life of someone who lives chasing the next sensation, the next pleasure, in the next compliment, the next exciting relationship, the next trip, the next purchase. A person trapped in the aesthetic stage organizes their entire existence around a single question: what gives me a good kick right now? In the beginning, it works. The aesthetic life is light, fun, photogenic. It fits nicely into a cute caption. But Kierkegaard noticed something that people living in that stage take decades to admit. Every sensation wears out. Every pleasure gets saturated. Every new stimulus loses its novelty. And when that happens, the person doesn't conclude that the strategy was wrong. They conclude that they need a stronger stimulus, a more intense one, a more radical one. They change cities, change partners, change careers, change hobbies, change their body. And every change brings relief for a short while. Because the problem isn't in the content of the sensation. It's in the fact that an entire life is being built on top of something that is, by definition, fleeting. The aesthetic stage is exactly where modern culture tries to trap you. The entire machinery of entertainment, consumption, social media, and disposable dating is calibrated to keep you spinning in that loop of sensations. Because a person stuck in the aesthetic is a predictable person. They buy, they click, they watch, they scroll. They never stop long enough to ask whether this is really the life they want to live. And if they stop, they feel empty. And if they feel empty, they reach for another stimulus, and the cycle closes in on itself again. If you're recognizing yourself right now, take a deep breath. This isn't a sentence, it's a diagnosis. And a well-framed diagnosis is already halfway toward getting out of the place you're in. There is, however, a second stage. Kierkegaard called it the ethical. It's the stage of someone who, at some point, gets tired of the carousel, stops, looks around, and realizes there's something bigger than the sensation of the moment. There is duty. There is commitment. There is care for another person. There is the word you gave, which you keep even when you don't feel like it. The ethical isn't the aesthetic because it doesn't ask what will give me pleasure right now. It asks what is the right thing to do right now, even if no one saw it, even if no one applauded. It's a huge step. It's the difference between a delayed adolescent and an actual adult. And here's an observation that might be uncomfortable. Contemporary culture systematically mocks the ethical. It calls it boring, square, old-fashioned. It associates commitment with imprisonment. It associates duty with oppression. It associates loyalty to a project with a lack of openness. And that constant mockery works. An entire generation grew up learning that saying yes to one thing means closing the door on all the others, and that closing any door is a kind of loss. The result is a generation that closes no doors, keeps everything open all the time, and ends up living in a cold room full of drafts, never building a warm space anywhere. The ethical stage proposes the opposite. It says that human maturity does, in fact, require closing some doors, committing, planting yourself on some ground, and that only those who accept that weight discover a freedom deeper than the adolescent freedom of choosing nothing at all. But Kierkegaard, with that almost cruel lucidity of his, didn't stop there. He saw that even the ethical stage has its limits. Because as noble as it is to live fulfilling duties, if there is no deeper layer, if there is no ultimate meaning, you can end up being nothing more than a very well-trained rule follower. A good employee, a good father, a good citizen, a good member of everything, and still a stranger to yourself. So he pointed to a third stage, which he called religious, but which today might be better translated as the stage of transcendence, or of ultimate meaning. It's the stage in which a person no longer lives merely for sensation, nor merely for duty, but for something that goes beyond them. For a calling, for a devotion, for something that gives a name to everything they do. And Kierkegaard's painful observation is that the overwhelming majority of people are born, live, and die in the first stage. The aesthetic, consuming experiences, collecting moments, without ever growing into the next two. Look around you, look inside. How many of the people you know are actually living for something bigger than the next sensation? And how many, including maybe yourself, are just switching stimulus every time the last one loses its spark? I completely understand when you recognize yourself in this description and feel a mix of anger and shame. That's an honest reaction. I'm not saying this to humiliate you. I'm saying this to wake you up. Because the recognition of this situation is, paradoxically, the first truly ethical act of your life. The moment you admit you're stuck in the aesthetic, you've already started getting out of it. The problem isn't being stuck. The problem is denying that you are. And here comes another point that Kierkegaard hammers with a force that sticks in your head. He calls it the problem of the crowd. To him, the crowd is a modern invention. Not the physical crowd, which has always existed, but the psychological crowd. The idea that there is a general opinion, a consensus, a normal way of being, which defines what is acceptable and what is weird. The crowd is that voice which, when you think about doing something different, whispers that no one does that you're going to look ridiculous, that you need to fit in. The crowd is the constant pressure to make you live more or less like everyone else, to make you want more or less what everyone else wants, to make you suffer more or less over the same things. Kierkegaard was radical on this point. He said the crowd is the lie. And he said this because he realized that within the crowd, nobody is responsible for anything. The decision is diluted. If everyone does it, nobody does it. If everyone thinks that way, no one thinks. If everyone is wrong, no one is wrong. The person dissolves into the group and, through that dissolution, escapes the weight of being themselves. The price looks low at first. It looks comfortable not to have to decide anything on your own. But the interest on that loan gets expensive in the long run, because an individual soul dissolved into the crowd becomes a ghost, present everywhere, whole nowhere. You have to understand that Kierkegaard's crowd isn't just the mass on the street. It's a mental structure. It's the weighted average of opinions you carry inside your own head without ever having authorized them. When you pick a movie based on what would sound good to mention at work, it's the crowd choosing. When you like a post out of fear of how the absence of that like would look, it's the crowd liking. When you feel ashamed of a passion of yours just because it doesn't match your group, it's the crowd feeling shame in your place. This invisible rule is, for Kierkegaard, the subtlest form of tyranny a human being can suffer, because it doesn't come from outside knocking on your door. It already lives inside you, paying rent with the hours of your own life. If right now, in this moment, you feel something like a sting in your chest reading this, hold on to that sting. It matters. It's your individuality, suffocated, trying to breathe. And here's the first knot of this video that I need you to see clearly, because it will be untied further along. The feeling of emptiness that you would describe as nothing making any sense when you look at it closely has a very specific pattern. It shows up precisely in the moments when the crowd turns down its volume, when you're alone, when you wake up early before the rest of the house, when you come home from a party and the silence hits, when you're lying down staring at the ceiling. Those are the moments when the crowd loosens its leash. And those are the moments when your own voice tries to speak up, except after years of being silent, it no longer knows what to say. And what's left in its place is that undefined buzz you call emptiness. But the system, of course, doesn't let those moments last very long. Current technology is almost perfect at one thing: at preventing silence from taking over. You wake up, and the first thing your brain does is reach for the phone. Before even brushing your teeth, before even thinking about who you are today, your brain makes contact with 1,000 opinions, 1,000 images, 1,000 lives, 1,000 urgencies, before it can even remember that it has a life of its own. Your commute is accompanied by a podcast. Your lunch is accompanied by a video. Your shower is accompanied by music. Your sleep comes accompanied by a series. Every gap, every crack, every breath of your consciousness has been occupied by some kind of external stimulus. And Frankl would have a clear word to describe what's happening here. He would call all of this a masking mechanism for the existential vacuum, because the more intense the vacuum, the more intense the distractions need to be in order to cover it. It's almost a mathematical relationship. A person at peace with themselves can go hours without stimulation. A person in silent despair can't handle 5 minutes. Watch that line in yourself. How long can you, today, go without picking up your phone, without turning anything on, without looking for a distraction? If the answer is just a few minutes, that's not a sign that you're hyperactive. It's a sign that there's something in there you don't want to find. And it's exactly that thing which, if you have the courage to find it, can change everything. It's worth looking at the structural logic behind this distraction machine. The economic model of today's digital platforms depends on one simple metric: attention time. The longer you stare at the screen, the more revenue the system generates. And the system, by design, optimizes everything to keep you there. Every notification, every autoplay, every infinite feed, every color chosen, every sound, every interval between rewards was tested in behavioral labs until they found the exact point where your inner will to leave gives up. This isn't a conspiracy theory. It's public literature from engineers who worked at those companies. In other words, your mental exhaustion, your hollowing out, your difficulty being alone with your own mind aren't just the product of your personal weakness. They are, in part, the result of a sophisticated industry competing 24 hours a day for your consciousness. Seeing this doesn't take away your responsibility, but it shifts the weight. You're not a failure for not resisting. You're a human being facing an opponent your biology simply wasn't designed for. And there's still one more point that, if you understand it, changes everything. A point both thinkers were studying point to clearly, but that almost nobody actually applies in practice. I'll get to it in a moment after we go through one last piece. A pause and a warning are in order here. I'm not saying all entertainment is bad. I'm not preaching that you need to drop everything and become a monk. That would be a lazy oversimplification. The issue isn't distraction itself. It's the use of distraction as a wall. It's the difference between medicine taken at the right dose and medicine that has become permanent anesthesia. A show watched after a long day can be rest. 6 hours of non-stop scrolling, in the dark, before bed, until your head hurts, is not rest. It's escape. And escape, when it becomes a habit, becomes a cage. Frankl noticed something even more specific. He realized that the existential vacuum, when it isn't faced, tends to manifest in three classic ways. The first is the unbridled pursuit of pleasure. The person tries to fill the inner hole with stronger and stronger sensations. Food, sex, substances, drama, adrenaline. The second is the obsessive pursuit of power. The person tries to fill the inner hole with achievements, control, status, hierarchy. They want to give orders. They want to decide. They want to be seen. The third, which is the most socially accepted, is the relentless pursuit of money. Not money as a means of living, but money as a life project. The idea that if I hit a certain number in my bank account, the emptiness will end. You've probably already noticed that none of the three works. People deeply immersed in pleasure, in power, or in money rarely seem to be at peace. They seem sped up. They seem hungry. They seem to always need more. Because the root of the problem is spiritual, not material. And trying to solve a spiritual problem with a material solution is like trying to quench your thirst by drinking seawater. The more you drink, the thirstier you get. And at some point, the very effort of drinking starts to consume you from within. This is one of the most precise diagnoses psychology has ever produced. Slav and the dominant culture does everything it can to make sure it never reaches you. Because a person who understands this diagnosis stops consuming compulsively. And a person who stops consuming compulsively is terrible for a system that needs them consuming. Let me tell you something that might bother you. A lot of people hit an emotional wall precisely after achieving the thing they spent their whole life wanting. The degree came, the job came, the house came, the relationship came, the body came. And instead of the promised peace, a strange, almost guilty disappointment came because the person feels they have no right to feel that way after so much effort. But they feel it. And that silent disappointment is perhaps the most damning proof of everything Frankl wrote. Meaning, when it's real, cannot be manufactured by achievements. It doesn't come from the outside. It has to be discovered in something bigger than your own ego. And no reached goal, no matter how beautiful, can deliver that. There's a scene that repeats itself millions of times a year. In newly purchased apartments, in freshly renovated houses, in offices freshly occupied. Someone walks in, tosses the keys on the counter, sits on the new couch, looks around, waits to feel something, waits for that moment of arrival that seemed so obvious when it was still just a dream. And it doesn't come. What comes is a kind of strange quietness, almost a disappointment without an address. The person wonders if they did something wrong, if they waited for the wrong reason, if the achievement was supposed to come with something else attached. And quickly, to avoid facing that thought, they already start planning the next goal. Because thinking about a goal is more comfortable than accepting that the life they just bought, with the sweat of 10 years, wasn't, on its own, enough to fill what was empty. What was empty wasn't in the paycheck. It was in a much deeper layer. And that layer doesn't respond to achievement. It responds to something else, which we'll get to. Think for a second about someone you genuinely admire. Not someone famous, but someone you actually know. Someone who, when they walk into a room, seems to have roots. Someone who gets older and better. Someone who doesn't seem to always be chasing the next stimulus. If you observe that person carefully, you'll notice they have something in common with other people like them. They serve something. It might be a science. It might be an art. It might be a community. It might be a family in the deepest sense, not just the biological one. It might be a faith. It might be a craft. It might be a cause. But there's something there that is bigger than them, and it's to that thing they give themselves every single day. And that's where that density you feel in their presence comes from. It's not money. It's not good looks. It's not talent. It's meaning in action. Now I have to throw a provocation at you that might hurt. If you take the achievements out of your life, what's left? If you take away the job, the social media, the consumption, the distractions, the traffic, the noise, what's left? If very little is left, that's not a verdict on your worth. It's a map. It's a map showing where the empty places are that need to be filled with something real. And that's something real, love, according to everything we've seen so far, won't be delivered by any purchase, any achievement, any applause. It will have to be built from within, in silence, over time, against the current of a world that keeps telling you to look outward. Here comes another essential piece, and Kierkegaard holds the key to it. He wrote a lot about a specific feeling that, for centuries, was treated as an illness, but that he treated as a signal. That feeling is anguish. Not a panic attack kind of anxiety, but that deep anguish, with no defined object, that shows up sometimes out of nowhere. You're walking down the street, you're in some random moment of the day, and suddenly a kind of vertigo rises in your chest. There's no clear reason. Nothing explicit happened. And still, there it is, pushing at you from the inside. The automatic reaction today is to take medicine, to look for a therapist to make the discomfort go away, or to grab some quick stimulation to plug the hole. Kierkegaard would say not to do that immediately. He'd say to listen first. Because anguish, as he read it, is the dizziness of freedom. It's the internal signal that you are standing before a real possibility of choosing, of changing, of becoming who you really are. Anguish shows up when the soul realizes that the current path is not the true path, but it has not yet had the courage to point to where it should go. It's like an inner compass vibrating because you're walking in the wrong direction. If you silence the compass, you keep walking the wrong way, only now without any warning. If you listen to the compass, you discover it has been trying to save you for years. This doesn't mean that all clinical anxiety is just that philosophical anguish. There are psychological sufferings that do require professional care, and there's nothing heroic about refusing help when you need it. That's not the point. The point is that, in many cases, the chronic restlessness that follows so many people today isn't simply a defect to be silenced. It's a message to be decoded, and the rush to smother it may be costing you precisely the life you were born to live. Understanding this makes clearer a phenomenon that maybe you've observed in yourself or in people close to you. The chronic self-deception of living a life that deep down belongs to other people. See if this description sounds familiar. Someone follows a career because their parents considered it stable. Marries someone who seemed right for the family. He buys an apartment in a specific neighborhood because that's what the social circle expects. Has a kid on schedule. Posts the right vacations on the right dates. And, with each milestone completed, waits to feel a satisfaction that never comes. From the outside, the life looks like a well-executed script. On the inside, it's a sequence of small abandonments of oneself, each so acceptable that no one notices, not even the person themselves, until one day in their early 30s, their early 40s, their early 50s, the accumulated weight of all those abandonments finally blows up. And it blows up in very specific ways. It blows up as a difficult midlife turnaround. It blows up as an important relationship starting to fall apart out of nowhere. It blows up as a sudden urge to drop everything and disappear. It blows up as a physical discomfort with no clear cause that no one can explain. It blows up as growing emotional distance from the people you love most. It blows up as a tiredness that sleep doesn't fix. All of that is the same soul trying to say a sentence that has gone unsaid for too long. This is not my life. This was never my life. Kierkegaard saw a cruel irony in this. The same people who take pride in being responsible, in sticking to the script, in meeting expectations, are often the most profoundly irresponsible toward themselves. They fulfill everything except the basic commitment of being who they are. And that commitment cannot be delegated. Nobody can live your life for you. Not your mother, not your father, not your partner, not the algorithm that suggests which career to follow, not the voice of the crowd. Every minute that passes without that commitment is a minute less to take it on. I understand if at this moment you're feeling a tightness in your chest. It's not easy to face this, and I recognize the courage of anyone who keeps reading up to this point. Keep going. The way out starts to appear from here on. If you're enjoying this content, check the first comment for our exclusive ebook, Alchemy and Archetypes. It goes much deeper into what we're talking about here, and it can be a useful map for the crossing that lies ahead. Now, I need to take the conversation to a more sensitive point, because any honest reflection on meaning has to face the topic almost everyone avoids: suffering. There's an almost religious belief in today's world that suffering is always a mistake, that all pain can and should be eliminated, so that a good life is a life without friction. This belief is new in human history, and it comes at a huge cost. Because when you believe that no suffering should exist, any suffering starts to feel like a defect in your biography instead of a part of it. Frankl, who lived in that extreme setting and saw up-close forms of suffering that most of us can hardly imagine, reached a conclusion that challenges this modern logic. He realized that what breaks a human being on the inside is not suffering itself. It's meaningless suffering. A pain that has a reason can be crossed. A pain that feels absurd, gratuitous, random, eats you up from the inside. That's why mothers who lose children, patients with serious illnesses, people carrying deep emotional wounds, often manage not only to survive, but to rebuild their lives as long as they find, even with difficulty, some thread of meaning inside that experience. And that's why people with apparently peaceful lives, but without any articulated sense of meaning, can fall apart in front of small frustrations. Stop for a second and observe your relationship with your own suffering, with your disappointments, with your pains. Do you have the habit of facing them, of listening to them, of seeing what they're trying to show you? Or do you have the habit of covering them up as fast as possible, treating them as flaws to be corrected, hiding them beneath a packed schedule? Because if your honest answer is the second one, you might be missing precisely the signals that would lead you out of the emptiness. I'm not saying you should romanticize pain. Nobody needs more suffering than they already have. What I'm saying is that the pain that's already there, the one you didn't ask for, the one that came unannounced, can be listened to in a different way, not as an enemy, but as a messenger. And sometimes it carries the only letter that can reconnect you with what truly matters. We've reached a point where the diagnosis is out in the open. The emptiness, the silent despair, the aesthetic stage, the crowd, the compulsive distraction, the unread suffering, all of it drawn out in rich detail. Now the question that weighs is a different one. What do we do with all of this? Is there a way out? Is there a path? Is there something concrete to be done? Or are we just left to cry over the sorrows of an era? And here, both Frankl and Kierkegaard offer something that, for those with ears to listen, is worth more than any self-help manual ever published. Frankl proposes, in very practical terms, what he calls the 3 possible paths to meaning. He insists that meaning doesn't fall out of the sky. It is found through concrete acts of giving. The first path is what he calls creative value. It's the meaning that is born from what you offer to the world. It can be your work, it can be your art, it can be care for a cause, it can be a simple craft done with attention. The point isn't the grandeur of the work. It's the act of giving something that comes out of you and goes beyond you. Someone who works only to pay the bills lives a hollowed-out version of what they could live. Someone who works knowing that what they do matters, even in a small way, inhabits an entirely different life. The second path Frankl calls experiential value. It's the meaning that is born from encounter. Encounter with a loved one, with a work of art, with nature, with an idea that transforms you. It's the ability to be truly present in an experience, letting it leave a mark on you instead of just consuming it. A person who walks down the street looking at the sky, who listens to their child talk without faking attention, who stops in front of a good song instead of using it as background noise, is exercising that experiential value. And every time they do, a little of the meaning comes back inside them, almost without their noticing. The third path is the hardest, and it's the one that shows Frankl's genius. It's called attitudinal value. It's born from the attitude you take in the face of a suffering you cannot avoid. When everything has already gone wrong, when the situation cannot be changed, there is still one last freedom left, and it is the freedom to decide who you will be in front of that. It is the freedom that those in charge of that regime could never take away from the prisoners. It's the freedom nobody can take from a patient in a hospital bed. It's the freedom that, until the last breath, belongs only to you. And it's in that freedom that the deepest core of any true meaning lives. You may not control what happens. You always control the posture with which it happens. Frankl proposed a radical inversion of perspective that, on its own, would already change many lives if taken seriously. He said that the classic question, "What is the meaning of my life?" is phrased the wrong way. That question places you as someone who should receive a ready-made answer, in as if the universe held a sealed envelope with your name on it. He proposed flipping the question. Life is the one asking. Life asks you every single day, in every situation, what you have to offer. What you're going to do with this moment that will not come back. What you're going to do with this person standing in front of you. What you're going to do with this suffering that chose you. Meaning is not something to be discovered like buried treasure. It is something to be answered like a question directed at you. And Kierkegaard, coming from another era and another tradition, delivers the missing piece. He talks about an inner movement he called the leap, the existential leap. It's not a mystical concept. It's a very concrete description of a moment that everyone, sooner or later, has to face. It's the moment when you stop analyzing your life, stop weighing endless pros and cons, stop waiting for the day when absolute clarity will arrive, and simply choose. Choose a path. Choose a person. Choose a cause. Choose a way of being. Not because you're sure, but because you've understood that certainty will never come, and that the absence of choice is also a choice, only a cowardly one, that leaves you slipping through your own fingers. The leap is frightening, and Kierkegaard didn't try to hide that fear. He said that before the leap, there's that vertigo similar to what someone feels looking down from a cliff. The space of choice looks like an abyss. But he said, with that almost religious rigor, that meaning does not appear before the leap. It is born from the leap. You don't get handed the ground first and then walk on it. You walk, and the ground appears beneath your feet. Anyone who spends their life waiting for absolute certainty to change jobs, to commit to a love, to write the book, to seek help, to change their life, spends their life frozen. And a frozen life is exactly the fertile soil of the silent despair we saw at the beginning. This part bothers people because it takes away an excuse a lot of them have been using for years. The excuse that when they're more prepared, when they have more money, when they're older, when they finish therapy, when the kid grows up, when this difficult phase passes. In short, one mythical day, things will change. Kierkegaard and Frankl would say, each in their own way, that day never comes. What exists is today. What exists is the next concrete choice you have in your hands. Each day postponed is a day of your life handed over to someone else. And if you look carefully at who is receiving those days, you'll find it's almost always the same old voice. That quiet voice repeating that staying where you are is safer, that changing is dangerous, that nobody does it that way. That voice, Kierkegaard would say, is the crowd living inside you, and it is not working in your favor. Notice how everything starts to make sense together. The emptiness you feel is not some random disease. It's the symptom of a life that has lost its instincts, lost its traditions, dissolved into the crowd, drowned in distractions, and now finds itself without an articulated reason why. The anguish that rises in the silences is not an enemy. It's an invitation. The despair hidden beneath a packed schedule is not a punishment. It's a diagnosis, and the way out isn't in another purchase, another relationship, another job, another city. It's in a deep reorientation of everything. A reorientation that starts with a tiny gesture. Stop, listen, respond. Stopping is harder than it sounds. Stopping means turning off, for even a little while, the flood of stimuli. It means accepting the initial discomfort of silence. It means allowing the thoughts you've been avoiding to finally show up. Listening means not immediately judging those thoughts, not rushing to label them as anxiety, as deep sadness, as emotional heaviness, as a crisis. It means asking in a simple way, what are you trying to tell me? Responding means acting small and right instead of acting big and wrong. Nobody has to reinvent their entire life in one afternoon, but everybody has to at some point. You start making choices coherent with what they have discovered inside. A friendship that weighs on you and doesn't make sense anymore can begin to be closed with care. A habit that numbs you can be replaced with something that feeds you. A conversation that has been postponed for months can finally happen. The point is not to change everything at once. The point is to stop pretending that nothing is asking for change. There is still one last knot to be untied, and it might be the most important of them all. A lot of people, when they finally face this kind of content, get paralyzed by one crippling doubt. What if I choose wrong? What if the meaning I build turns out to be the wrong meaning? What if I give myself to a cause, to a person, to a path, and 10 years from now find out it was all a mistake? That doubt holds more lives hostage than any objective limitation. And it has an answer, even if it's an austere one. Life, by design, offers no guarantees before you give yourself to something. None. The only way to know if a path has meaning is to walk it seriously. If you walk, you'll find out where it serves you and where it doesn't, and you'll be able to correct the course. If you don't walk, you'll stay frozen, full of perfect possibilities in your head and no real existence in your hands. Between the perfect possibility that never happens and the imperfect reality that is lived, Frankl and Kierkegaard chose, without hesitation, the second one. And they were right. Maybe what steals the most from your life isn't a wrong choice. Maybe it's the silent sum of choices never made. I know that hurts to hear, but maybe it needed to be said that way so you can't pretend anymore that you didn't hear it. You'll remember that sentence later. It comes back. I'll close with the reframing I promised at the beginning. All of that which makes you feel strange, out of place, out of step with the majority. All of that might not be a sign that you're broken. It might be the exact opposite sign. A sign that some part of you, against all the pressures, is still awake. A sign that your inner world refuses to accept as natural a world that confuses motion with life, stimulation with joy, applause with worth. If everything were in order inside you, you would be perfectly adapted to the mass emptiness, and you wouldn't feel the discomfort you feel. The discomfort is, ironically, the best possible news about you. It means your inner compass, even if dusty, but still works. The meaning of your life isn't hidden in some exotic place you have to find. It isn't in some future achievement that will finally complete you either. It isn't a given answer, a lost piece at the back of a drawer. It is built. With each refusal of the crowd, with each silence faced instead of filled, with each choice made for what matters and not for what is expected, with each small act of loyalty to what you feel is true, even when no one is watching. The emptiness that today feels suffocating can be, if faced, the space where something finally true can be born inside of you. Not in spite of the emptiness. Because of it, you haven't lost meaning. You're being called to build it. And maybe the first step is precisely to accept that this calling exists. To accept that this weight in your chest, this nameless exhaustion, this uncomfortable silence are not adversaries. They are messengers. And that the day you begin to listen to them is the first day your life starts being truly yours. If this content touched somewhere you've been avoiding, drop a like on the video right now before you forget and consider joining our members club. See you in the next video.